Good afternoon. We will call our meeting to order as a work session to talk a little bit about our code and the maintenance in the building department. David, do you want to take it a little bit and talk a little bit about that, and then we'll turn it over to our building officials?
Yes, Mayor. Good evening. It's a pleasure to present tonight. We've got a number of speakers. They've been working hard. We've had a number of meetings to talk about everything with property maintenance. That's been one of the focuses of council for a couple of years now. If y'all recall, about a year ago, we did code enforcement and property maintenance aspects of it. Made some changes in the code, and that's been going forward, and that's how we're going to kind of start off. There's 4 prongs to this. The first part of it's going to be, Terry's going to talk a little bit about the property maintenance, code enforcement types of things. And then we're going to go into the rental inspection program and fire inspections, just to give you a little bit of education on how all of those kinds of things work. And then Chris is going to talk a little bit about the building code requirements, and then we'll close it all out with Mike talking a little bit about what requirements are there now, what we can enforce, and get you all thinking about things that you might want to change in any of these ordinances with the focus on property maintenance. And when we circle back around to some of that rental inspection program, I think some of it's in there, but you will remember, some of you may remember, it was a robust program when it was first introduced, and it got weeded down considerably to the program that we've got now. So with that, I think we've got about 20 or 30 minutes worth of presentation. That'll give you all plenty of time to chat a little bit. If you have questions along the way, please let us know, and we'll kick it off with Terry, and he's going to talk about code enforcement and the updates and successes over the past 8 months, I guess, since the code changes have been in place.
Terry, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you tonight, to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on in property maintenance and code enforcement. My areas of focus in property maintenance specifically are 2 areas. First is code enforcement, and you'll remember the ordinances that we updated there for inoperable vehicles, tall grass, and litter and debris. And then the second aspect of that is the Virginia Maintenance Code, which we had you guys add to our toolbox back at the end of December. It went into effect, so it's really only been in effect for 2021. And that deals with the health and safety and welfare of the occupants of any structure. So let's start with the code enforcement aspect of that. Again, we said that new city ordinances were put into place in March 2020. And the idea behind that was to kind of make those more consistent with each other and to make our process more consistent with how we were handling enforcement. We also purchased some new software in 2019 that also has made the notification process and the record-keeping process much more streamlined and efficient. So that has been really beneficial. I wanted to point out that our resolution rate for the cases that we've had has been excellent. The way I calculate that is if a citizen voluntarily complies, even if it takes some time and some prompting for us, then that's a resolved case. If we have to intervene as the city, then I would count that as not being resolved. And in all these cases, the city contractor has removed 6 inoperable vehicles out of 226 cases, so that's 97% compliance voluntarily. I think that's excellent. The city contractor has cleaned 2 properties out of 27 cases, that's about 93%, and the city contractor has mowed 11 properties out of 118 cases, about 90%. But I wanted to point out that 9 of those that are mowed or cleaned are vacant properties with absentee owners, so they're repeat offenders. So we've been taking care of those properties ourselves for quite a while. So that failure rate is not really as high as it might seem.
And is this like some of those are repeats, so you've mowed them multiple times over the summer?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so of those 9, there's probably 4 properties that we've had to enforce multiple times.
And I think we mentioned it before, but any expenses the city has on any of these, whether it's mowing or removing a structure, then it goes onto the tax ticket for down the road.
Yeah, and that was written into the ordinances so that if we incur expenses, then it goes as a lien against the property for the favor of the city. So that was built into the ordinances. Just to break down, a quick look at the code enforcement case numbers, inoperable vehicles, grass and weeds, litter and debris, and then we do occasionally have multiple violations where we'll cite them for more than one thing at a time. You can see the breakdown there. I do want to point out for inoperable vehicles that the caseload has been lower this year because of COVID, because of DMVs being harder to get appointments. We've been a little more lenient in trying to get those resolved. And in addition, I was out of the office for a month for surgery, so that slowed us down as well. And I also want to point out on this slide that we do occasionally get citizen complaints where we take no action. Very often citizens think we can do way more than we actually can, so they'll come and complain about something, and we'll go out and take a look at it. We always respond to a complaint, but there are instances where we can't really do anything about it, so I wanted you to be aware of that as well.
One of the big issues that was brought up with the inoperable vehicles was people who are going to work on their vehicles, people who are in process. Have you experienced much issue with that as you've gone through the enforcement?
I have not, and in actuality, if somebody calls me and tells me I'm working on it, I'm trying to do this, and gives me the story, I will definitely work with them timing-wise to
Great.
make sure that we get that voluntary compliance. That's always preferable to us going and yanking a vehicle out when we don't really need to do that, so.
Outstanding, thank you.
Yeah. Here's an example of a code enforcement case. This particular property, the person was collecting items that they were going to salvage for metal recycling. We got a complaint about that, so we went and dealt with the owner of the property, and obviously they got it cleaned up. So that was a good success there. And then the second aspect of my job is the Virginia Maintenance Code. And I wanted to pull out a couple of sections of that code to highlight here for you to be aware of the things that I was talking about. Sometimes there are things that we can't enforce. The purpose of this code is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And health, safety, and welfare is something you'll hear repeated a lot in this code. And so I wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And that's kind of the bar that we have to look at a particular case and decide, is it affecting somebody's health, safety, or welfare? And the second aspect of that statement that I wanted you to be aware of is that they are required to maintain at the least possible cost consistent with recognized standards. So in other words, we can't go and say you need to spend more money on your property. That's not an option for us here. And in relation to that, this is another section of the code that says no provision of this code shall require alterations to be made to an existing building or structure or to equipment unless conditions are present which meet the definition of an unsafe structure or a structure unfit for human occupancy. That's a really high bar to set for us to be able to intervene. So, with that being said, we have opened 11 maintenance violations in 2021. That's only been in effect since the beginning of this year. 6 of those have been resolved, and we have 5 open or pending right now. Typical violations, I wanted to give you some ideas there, deal with exterior weather tightness, missing siding on a building, roofing, or windows, the safety aspect of it, guardrails, decks, porches, stairs, things like that. And then, of course, structural issues. If a building's in danger of collapsing, that would, of course, be our case. But a couple of examples here, just photographs. This was an example. It's kind of dark, but it's hard to see that chimney was leaning pretty significantly, was in danger of falling. This was a rental property, and we contacted the owner of the property, and you can see that they took the chimney down, repaired the soffit up above it there, and are actually continuing to work on the structure to improve it there. So again, a good success. And then this is a case that's not yet completed, and I wanted to include it to demonstrate to you that this can often be a years-long process for us to deal with the structure. This property has ultimately been condemned and is currently in our legal process, but you can see the missing roof. It's vacant and is in really terrible shape. But So that's all that I had. The next part is to deal with fire inspections and rental
Well,
property.
before we go there, yeah, I was going to say, let's do a little round of questions, because I know I have a lot I wanted to know. But first of all, thank you.
Sure.
Because I have visibly noticed a lot of improvements to areas that were blighted before, and where you've gone in and worked with the property owner that seems to have made a difference. Would you say that over the last, 18 months or so, you've seen a change in how some of the properties are being maintained in the city?
Definitely, yeah. And I think word is getting out that we're doing this kind of thing, and that's helping a tremendous amount.
And from what I can glean, it appears that most of the cases that you have issue with are absentee property owners, rentals. I mean, there are a few that are obviously homeowners that live there, but many of the cases are that absentee owner, that it's a rental unit or a property that they have here in Radford, but they're not here.
Yes, the absentee and vacant properties are definitely the harder cases to deal with. We even have a couple of properties where we have not been able to establish contact with the owner, so that's,
Are there tools that you don't have even after we strengthened the toolbox last year that you found, well, we need this piece, or another community has that piece that helps us further address things?
no, I think we're in really good shape to continue to enforce what we have planned to do. I think you guys have set us up really well to do that, so.
Great. Naomi, what do you have?
Well, that was along my question. I was curious about these, and I'm sorry, I meant to pull up the ordinance that we did adjust. For these repeat offenders, are there any enhancements? And I can't remember off of the top of my head if that was already included. Is there any extra incentive if there's a person who just violates and violates and violates again?
No, well, yes, in a way. It becomes a financial burden to them. If we're continually putting tax liens on their property, then that becomes an enforcement action, that can ultimately be taken. The property could be sold in a tax sale. So, yeah, we're in the short term, it may look like we're losing money, but we really are doing that against the property owner, so that it is their burden to deal with. The property can't be sold without dealing with that.
And it appears that the vast majority of the cases, as you said, 85 to 95% are resolving on their own, that it's a very small percentage that
Yes.
we're having to address that way.
Yes, it is, and you can see that even in the numbers of property maintenance cases. They're much smaller than the others. They're more difficult to deal with, but there's less of them, so, yeah.
Anything else?
No.
Jesse?
I was just wondering, on the cases where you do have the people that are a little bit resilient to the change that you've had contact with, could you cite some of the reasons? Is there anything COVID-related, financial burden, anything of that you're running into?
Financial burden occasionally comes up where they'll mention to me, I can't afford to do, whatever we may be asking them to do. And there again, we're willing to work with them time-wise. We've even gone to the point of recommending them to some of the local nonprofit agencies that might help with things. We've had a nonprofit agency go in and mow the grass for a man that was elderly, wasn't able to do it himself. So, yeah, we do have some other recourses like that, and we are, like I said, very willing to work with people if they contact us to let us know there's some hardship and a reason they need extra consideration.
And I'm assuming we work with them, like with our program within the city. Have we received any referrals from them that you're aware of where we've had to assist someone?
Terry and Chris are both aware that we have an emergency home care program, and we discussed, and a couple of things. They have to be the homeowners, and of course, we've got, I've had inquiries this year regarding, and you'll see later on in the paper that there's been inquiries, but never any follow through this past year. So it's something that we're working on trying to, really try and ensure that the community knows that it's available.
Okay.
And what they're able to do. Something that we found in a couple of the instances is they were really concerned about us going in and really condemning folks. So their fear was, okay, if we go in and we're having this work done, and they see it's worse than it is, and their fear is that they would just end up losing their home altogether. So, going to
Thanks.
You good? Onassis, what do you have?
Yeah, so I think it's sort of along Vice Mayor's lines as far as the teeth that are involved with this. So this property in particular, so you talk about the legal process taking years to come to fruition. What recourse does the city have in terms of the maintenance on this property? Or, I know we're assessing liens, I get that. Like this, a property like this that looks like it's overgrown, there could be some possible, I'm sure, varmints or whatever's in there, what have you. What is the city doing for those people who live in this neighborhood to maintain or do something about this house as the people who live around this house see this every day?
Yeah. Okay.
I'll speak to that
Oh,
one.
thanks,
since
Ryan.
that one kind of falls under my purview.
Okay.
In a case like this, where we have the code enforcement with the ordinances within the city, that spells out that we could go in and remove the vehicle if needed, or we could mow the grass. And Mike can follow through on this, but once we're inside of that maintenance code, it's pretty much legal action. I mean, I couldn't hire a contractor to go out and redo that roof and put a lien on the property. So these, once you get into the maintenance side of the code, it's a little more difficult to find resolve.
So with some of this, though, to follow up on Onassis, we had talked before, one of the reasons we went to the Virginia code was that was a little more accepted as opposed to what we had. It was what was usually being done in most communities. Are you seeing better results with the legal system? Because I know one of our problems we had before was that's where it would go and then it would get sort of tossed back. That the judge might say, well, I understand, you're struggling, give it 6 months, give it a year, give it whatever. How are we looking with that?
Actually, we haven't taken a case to court yet since all this has been updated, and since we've formally adopted the maintenance code, we've had nothing go to court.
Because we recognize that as an issue with our code and that we wanted to conform with what the state had going on.
Right.
So, do you anticipate anything going on further with that anytime soon? Or?
Well, this one's in legal action. I know we
Okay.
can't.
We can't talk about
speak
specifics, yeah.
But this could possibly be the first one that sees
Okay.
a courtroom.
Just to explain that when the city revamped the ordinances that they've described, that also included providing more administrative measures that could be taken and given the ordinances more teeth in that respect too. In this particular instance here, the legal process hasn't taken years. I think the entire process of dealing with the issue, both in terms of administratively under the maintenance code, as well as giving the property owner lots of chances to try to abate the issues to where now it's finally gotten to the point where we've taken legal action. And the reason why that, at least I recommended, in part, to take legal action here was because we had some question about who were in fact the owners of this property. And despite some really diligent efforts, from Chris and Terry, they were not getting any responses to the notices that were being sent. And if I recall this correctly, this was a property that was actually owned by a partnership that at some point went defunct. And you had, different partners that we had to locate and determine their interest, to where we finally determined, I think it's just easier to go ahead and, before taking an action as drastic as demolishing the property, let's go to court first, serve notice upon who we believe the stakeholders to be, and obtain a court order to take that action with hopefully everyone before the court that has an interest in this matter. And that's really only been pending for a matter of months, a few months at this point. And sure enough, when we took the court action, we finally got a response, from the property owner. But it should never get to that point, with the efforts that Chris and Terry had made to contact them.
Thank you.
And if I could go back to Mr. Burris's question initially, we did also mow the grass on that property for several years while we were in that legal process, so that the neighbors were not having to deal with not just a building looking like that, but
And
the
my other
yard
concern is that tree as well, right? So a lot of these properties, I have a habit of walking through neighborhoods and just taking pictures for myself. And so what assurances do property owners who are adjacent to those properties have in terms of damage to their property caused by trees that are not maintained or are dead? what have you? And then also the second question, I guess more to Mike, is once this process is resolved, and let's say it comes to the point where it is now, is it turned over to the city, a city-owned property? What are the possibilities as far as the outcome of that litigation?
You want to speak? I'll speak to the tree.
Okay.
Trees are specifically exempt from
Okay.
the weed ordinance. It's a civil issue. We get plenty of tree complaints all the time.
Okay.
So that, we don't really have any control over that. Anything that's planted or cultivated is exempt from the weed ordinance. And as far as this example, if we were to demolish this property, then that would go as a lien on the property. We would not take over the property or anything.
Those are my two.
Okay. Forrest, what do you have?
Nothing for me.
Okay. Again, thank you all so much. It has been one of those things where you don't want to put anybody in a bad position, but we've had properties that have been in arrears for a long, long, long time. Do you feel like we're making a little more headway than we were before, and we're starting to get that list whittled down a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's good. All right. Thank you. Thank you both for all the work you've done.
Thanks.
I will say that I think the actions. 18 months, and of course, COVID has been a
Yeah.
significant factor in all of this, and there's some things that you're going to hear with both the rental inspection program, fire inspections, as well as this. COVID has slowed things down, but all the actions that you took a year ago are making a difference. We're seeing a lot of changes. People are really stepping up and helping make these go. And I will say about everybody that's presenting tonight, these guys care about people, and they try to be compassionate. You have to be strong in what you're doing, because you've got neighbors and calls and things like that, and ordinances have got to be upheld. But if we can work with them, and if there's avenues in which they can go, whether it's through one of the programs or if they need some help from DSS or something like that, we're looking for as many different things as we can to help out. So appreciate all that council did to help make this process better. Thank you to Terry and Chris for all that they've done in getting these things going forward. And now we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to have Chris Gardner to start talking a little bit about the both fire inspection, because we wanted y'all to know a difference, as well as the rental inspection program. He wears both those hats, as well as running out on calls for fire and EMS as well. So jack of all trades.
And first, let us say thank you for all that you do. We know it's a heavy load. We
Thank you all for
appreciate
having
it.
me. All right, so I was asked to speak today on the difference between our fire prevention inspection and the property maintenance rental inspection programs. First, self-introduction. Chris Gardner. I've been with Radford City Fire EMS full-time since 2010, and that time been assigned as a fire prevention inspector, and then took over as a property maintenance rental inspector with the retirement of David Stillwell last year. Certified as a fire inspector in accordance with fire program standards, rental inspector in accordance with Department of Housing standards, fire investigator, EMT. Been with the department actually since 2003 to 2010 as a volunteer. Our department currently has 4 fire inspectors that are currently certified to the NFPA 1031 standard, which is the standard for certification for fire safety inspectors, and 1 that is cross-certified as a property maintenance inspector through Department of Housing and Community Development. We work on shift. We work 24 on, 48 off shifts, and conduct inspections along with answering calls, fire truck, medic truck, station duties, routine maintenance at the facility, everything else we have going on. And we attempt to conduct the fire safety inspections based on a guideline we have on priority, and the inspections on the residential rental properties based on complaints. Mission of our department or division is to ensure public and firefighter safety through education, inspections, and consistent professional enforcement of the Virginia Statewide Fire Prevention Code, and to educate and train the public on fire safety prevention measures necessary to ensure the protection of life and property. On the fire safety inspections, I want to touch on how we get there, and that's through city ordinance adopting the statewide fire prevention code. I'm not going to read through it. I just wanted to reference the ordinance. So our goal, sorry, stepped on myself. We conduct inspections on commercial properties for any condition that would cause combustion or ignition on the property or increase the intensity of a fire, and conditions that would prevent the evacuation of a building in the event of an emergency. Common fire code issues that we run into routinely: exit signs, emergency lights not working, improper use of extension cords, improper use of power strips, unsafe electrical wiring, fire extinguisher, alarm, sprinkler maintenance, and lock blocked obstructed exits.
Can I stop you for just a moment?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you walk us through what would count as a commercial property?
Okay,
Anything, I mean, any business or?
any property that would be a commercial building, mostly business. An apartment building would be a commercial property, inspectable, and I touch on that in the common areas are inspectable as far as mechanical rooms, common hallways, exterior of the structure, laundry room, as a commercial property separate from rental inspection.
Okay, thank you.
Our goals that we set through as a division, priority complaint inspections. Any complaint we receive is going to take priority for us to go try to investigate and address. Secondary, school daycare facilities, any institutional, so somewhere like a nursing home facility where you have residents that are more stringently confined and have different egress requirements, places of assembly, your restaurants, any high hazard facility, transient residential, your hotels, motels, and mercantile retail occupancies. We try to hit those annually if possible. Then touching on our factories, storage, general office buildings, and other residential occupancies on a biannual basis as time allows.
So with
I'm just-
these fire safety inspection goals, how many properties over the course of a year would you say that you actually inspect and have to examine?
I've got a slide later that talks about how many we've conducted so far this year,
Okay.
and that's subjective based on time.
Sure.
Being on shift, answering calls, and there's a lot of things that figure into the number that we can get done in a day's time. Shifting gears to the residential rental property inspection, there again touched on how we get to it. Code of Virginia, which then references the property maintenance code, which then gets adopted by local government through Radford City Ordinance for the inspection of the residential dwellings in the city, residential rental property dwellings in the city. These ordinances require the inspections of rental properties compliant with the statewide property maintenance code, and we inspect these properties to ensure safe living conditions, identify and correct substandard living conditions, identify building maintenance and building maintenance needs, and periodically with the property management and the landlord. So getting out, meeting with them before we receive a complaint would be ideal. To let's look at getting through some of these stuff, and proactive enforcement of building, and provide proactive enforcement of building maintenance. The rental inspection district, as defined in the ordinance, lays out, and I believe that is the most correct map, isn't it? It's not, and I apologize. The city ordinance has a map of the rental inspection districts, and apparently I put the wrong map, and I apologize on that. Touching on how they differ between a fire inspection versus a property maintenance inspection, I mentioned a apartment building complex, generic apartment building. Fire code grants us access to common areas, mechanical rooms, laundry rooms, where the rental inspection is going to grant us access to those as well as the individual dwelling units in that building. As of 2021, I ran this on September the 20th. The inspection division has conducted 243 inspection activities, consisting of 99 commercial fire inspections, 46 follow-up inspections on those commercial properties, 4 commercial complaint inspections, 3 acceptance tests, 7 food truck inspections, and 18 rental complaint inspections. That's a lot of inspections in the course of...
It is, and so over the
he's
course
keeping
of
the
a
ground
year,
hot.
you're probably 125, 130, somewhere like that, typically on average, or is this an unusual year?
It's subjective, and when you look at the conditions, and I know they touched on COVID, we weren't out actively doing fire safety prevention inspections for several of the earlier months of the year. So the numbers are subjective to what we are able to get done and what we have going on through the course of a day.
Okay.
I think one of the things about both the fire inspection program and rental inspection program, Chris had mentioned it earlier, being proactive. You know, you're trying to catch these things before there's a problem, before that we have to send out services that may be life-threatening or something like that. So they do a great job of identifying those kinds of things.
Naomi, did you have something you wanted to
I
ask?
think you're probably going to start answering my questions, so I'll let you keep talking before I interrupt anymore.
No, go ahead. No, I believe I'm at the question
Yeah.
slide.
Perfect timing.
So let's say you mentioned, you just said 18 rental complaints that you were called out for.
Yes, ma'am.
You get a complaint, and you go out and you're inspecting, what exactly are your constraints? What are you looking for? What are your, where are your lines? What is good, what's bad, what are you targeting?
We've got the guidelines laid out in the Virginia Property Maintenance Code along with the city ordinances for it, and the fire code touches on that as well. Safe wiring, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms operable, egress, steps, weeds, trash are touched in there. Vehicle storage on properties. A lot of conditions they've created with the electrical wiring. Sorry, I'm trying to touch on it, make sure I touch on all the things that are relevant. But basically, general housekeeping things inside the resident, dealing with the structure and the safety of that structure. And priority being egress, people being able to get out of the buildings, and then electrical safety the best we can. Can't see what's behind the walls, but what you can see and can address.
But to follow up with that, the 18 rental inspections that you've done this year, how would that typically go? Someone calls you out for a reason. Can you guide us through that a little bit?
I would get and of course we're on shift, so either
Right.
get the call when I'm working or get a message that, hey, somebody called with a complaint. Reach out to that property occupant, try to address what the issue is and find a time to meet with them. Depending on if it's a property owner that I'm familiar with, try to reach out to them as well, because if they can get their maintenance staff to meet me on site, it might be something they can quickly address and get notice of them in a more timely manner than trying to track them down later. Meet with them, go through the building, look for any violations of the maintenance code or city ordinance. If we find violations, address a notice violation, try to send a copy to the tenant and a copy to the property owner or property manager.
Wonderful. With those 18, how would you characterize most of the resolutions? Do you feel like we've been successful in getting the properties up to exceed or at least meet the level of code? Or are there some real challenges there?
I would have to look at the numbers, but I've had a couple that are ongoing, some
Yeah.
that were easily resolved, some that were unfounded complaints.
What are our options if we feel like something is not a safe structure for someone to be living in?
And that's where we need to, I guess,
Have a discussion?
have the discussion with the building official's
Yeah.
office, because anything dealing with unsafe is going to fall back on them as far as for further action.
Let's say I'm renting a house that's within the zone, because there's a couple issues there. And I'm starting to discover some things, like I turn on the light and it flickers real bad, it seems like there's a problem. And you come inspect it and say, I don't know if this is safe. What do we do at that point? And that person, I'm locked into a lease or what have you.
And the lease becomes a civil issue between landlord and
Right.
tenant. I would, if I felt there was a violation of the property maintenance or city ordinance, issue a notice of violation to the tenant, landlord, and try to get a plan of action from them on how they plan to correct those issues.
Could you go back to the slide showing the map? And I don't know if you said that's everything, because I remember when this was first discussed years ago, it was going to be much broader, and then we took it down to two small areas, the area in sort of central West Radford, and then the two areas on either side of the university. Do you get complaints? That's not the right one? Okay.
Okay, now I apologize,
You're fine, because that's part of the discussion. I know that we had reduced down the size. It's not the whole city, though, correct?
It's not, I can
Could we
clarify.
have some general
Okay.
discussion?
I'll clarify it for you. This area right here is not in it, and there's a small section right here that is. So
Okay.
that's the only difference.
Could we hear a little bit more about rental inspection districts? Just educate us about the way having rental inspection districts works in general, please. I would appreciate that.
Because I will address that in my comments. If you want to wait, I was going to answer also the mayor's question about, well, let's say that we do get a complaint, we go out, we issue a notice of correction or notice of violation, inform them as to what needs to be corrected to bring the property into compliance. And let's say that they fail to do that in a timely manner. Well, your rental inspection program, your ordinance, what it provides is essentially it incorporates by reference the penalty provisions of the Uniform Statewide Building Code portions that are in the Virginia statutes, which is under 36-106. And this primarily consists of a lot of, say, heavy fines that the court can impose for these violations. If you have repeated violations, you can get jail time. I think, though, the jail terms are limited to up to 10 days, or not big. So it's primarily fine-based. But here's the significant part, is that the court, by statute, has the authority to order the individual to abate the problem within a certain period of time.
Right.
So that's really, you know, that's what really gives you your teeth to compel abatement of whatever the violation is. In terms of the rental inspection districts, okay? This language is contained in your ordinance. It's also contained in the state code provision. But in essence, city council can establish what its rental inspection districts will be if it finds that property in that area, rental property within that area, is either blighted or at risk of deterioration, taking into consideration factors such as, say, the number of people living in the area, the risk of deterioration in the property. So one of the recommendations that I'm going to give you here in a minute when I do my presentation on this piece is I do have some recommendations for modifying your ordinance or amending your ordinance, but one of my recommendations is that if you're going to move forward with a rental inspection program, I think city council and the city need to begin by updating its rental inspection district map.
Right.
Because basically this map controls where your rental inspection program or ordinance applies. And you can establish rental inspection districts if you make the findings that I just described that are laid out in your ordinance. In addition to that, if you make similar findings for individual properties that lay outside of a district, you can include them on your rental inspection map, even though that individual property may not be within a district. So I think that's important because you may have some outlying properties that are an isolated property all to itself, aren't necessarily part of a big bunch of apartment complexes, say over at the university, but it nonetheless is a property in which there have been prior violations of the Uniform Statewide Building Code, in particular the Maintenance Code, or you find that this is a property that due to its nature is at risk of deterioration. So to answer Naomi's question, you know, that's how rental inspection districts are formed. They are formed at the discretion of council if those required findings are made. And, you know, when I think of, you know, rental property, you know, by its nature, it's at risk of deteriorating.
Right.
Compared to, say, other forms of property like a home. It's usually in areas where there's denser living conditions, more people living in one place. It's usually occupied for short terms by non-owners that aren't necessarily concerned about protecting their investments. So that's how rental inspection districts are formed, and at least one of my recommendations is that that's where I'd start.
Well, and I did have a question about that. Have you gotten calls outside our districts where you say, I'm sorry, that's outside the rental inspection districts?
No, it's in the ordinance, in the rental district ordinance. Any rental unit outside the district is still subject to it.
Okay.
So the difference between the two would be the ones in the district we have the right to go in. and
Regardless of a
inspect.
complaint, yeah.
If it's outside of the district, we have to have the permission of the tenant
Okay,
to go in. We can't go in though. So that's the primary difference in them. But every rental unit within the city is subject to the same
okay.
regulation.
Yeah, just to clarify that on all this point is that. And I'll explain this when I go through my comments, but what, the point of what Chris is saying is that there's nothing about having a rental inspection program that prevents the city from being able to respond to a complaint
Okay.
of there being a violation of like the maintenance code. So in other words, your ordinance, what it says is that if a complaint is received, then you can still respond to it as you normally would. What happens with the rental inspection program is that it sets up a process of periodic inspections,
Right.
whether you've received a complaint or not.
Please.
To that as well, as far as the rental inspection program, you have to take into account too the personnel.
Right.
They work on shift. If, Chris takes off on vacation and hits a weekend just right, it may be 7 to 9 days before he gets a complaint, so, or gets a chance to call, the complaint or the landlord or whoever. So it may be quite a bit of a time frame in between us getting a complaint, or sometimes, Chris and him get a complaint and send it up to us. So and sometimes the complainant will call back multiple times because there is that big gap of time.
Well, let me ask about that. If there's something where somebody's concerned, like I'm worried about my electricity, I'm worried about my heat, there's something going on, and you happen to be gone out of town or something like that, do we have a backup? Do we have a system to say, well, we can come out and do an emergency inspection?
Not at this time.
Okay,
If it's imminent, my office is required to inspect it.
Okay.
I mean, if somebody calls and says, our roof's ready to fall in,
okay.
it's.
So there is a process if someone needs immediate attention for us to be able to address it in some way, shape, or form. We've got some redundancy. It's just not as optimal as we might like with Chris, to have you to have a backup or to have support. But you're saying that if someone has a crisis situation or emergency that they're concerned about, it can be addressed more quickly. Okay.
And most complaints probably go through you all's office.
They start in there, they start
Yeah.
in there.
Okay.
So they start there, and then you let them know that an inspection is required?
Typically what'll happen is if we get a complaint, then I'll ask, is it a rental property? And if it is, then
Okay.
we'll direct them to the right office.
Okay.
Everybody's gonna call the building official.
Sure.
I get calls for trees.
Well, and I'm thinking about it in terms of, like publicizing a phone number to call if you're concerned and making people aware, because we have a lot of rental property within the city, and just making sure that folks know what services are available to protect them as a tenant of a property and go from there. Do you have more you were asking?
No, I just
Okay.
I just was sensing maybe some breakdown, and I wanted to make sure that I understood the flow a little better.
With the cases that you've had to go out and check on, do we feel like we have a lot of unresolved or repeat offenders out there that we've got to focus on a little bit more? I mean, have you seen that frequently, or is most stuff resolved fairly quickly?
It's subjective. It's
Okay.
going to depend on what it is, where it is.
Okay,
And there are conditions that do take, I believe, like Chris touched on earlier, do take a significant amount of time and resources to correct.
Yeah.
And working through those are ideal in how we handle most of them.
Forrest, do you have a question?
I think I'm good right now.
Onassis?
I think you addressed it. I think Mike talked about it as far as outliers who are not necessarily in that rental inspection zone, because we all know that not every rental property that may be in need of repair is within this area. So, yeah, no questions.
And Mike, I wanted to expand on that a little bit. How many communities just go in and establish the
wide
entire
swath,
community,
yeah.
a large area as a rental inspection zone where you can go on a regular basis outside of the practicality of it, which I get, but,
The simple answer is none.
okay.
And it's because the state code provision that provides the authority for a rental inspection ordinance specifically states that you cannot have a locality-wide rental inspection district. And it's because under the enabling legislation, in order to establish a rental inspection district, the properties in it, Naomi asked about the findings. And this is under, I provided you guys section 36-105.1:1. This is the actual enabling statute. And it says under B2, you'll notice it says the rental inspection district is based, this is how you form a rental inspection district. The rental inspection district is based upon a finding by the local governing body that, one, there is a need to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the occupants of dwelling units inside the designated rental inspection district. Two, the residential rental dwelling units within the designated rental inspection district are either A, blighted or in the process of deteriorating, or the residential rental dwelling units are in need of inspection by the building department to prevent deterioration, taking into account the number, age, and condition of residential dwelling units inside the proposed rental inspection district. Proposed rental inspection district, and three, the inspection of residential rental dwelling units inside the proposed rental inspection district is necessary to maintain safe, decent, and sanitary living conditions for tenants and other residents living in the proposed rental inspection district. So those are the findings that the city council would have to make in establishing what properties fall within a rental inspection district. And you'll notice, Mayor, immediately thereafter, the sentence immediately after what I read, it states that nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize one or more locality-wide rental inspection districts. You see it?
So David, give us a little history to help us through this. When we established the districts we had, I know it's been a little while, but, because it's been a decade ago or more.
More than a decade ago.
But,
yeah. It's been a while.
I know we went through this and then everything shrank a little bit from what we originally did. Can you talk about that some?
Yeah, in 2008 is when the rental inspection program came up. It was at a time we had a lot of housing going on, rental districts were expanding. Council was concerned about the overall, you've heard the theme tonight, health, safety, welfare, of any of these types of things. So they started looking at the program, and a pretty robust program was originally proposed. The district was bigger. As we got into the public hearing process, that those districts were weeded down. Some of the legislation was weeded down. Property rights issues came into play in all of this, as one would expect. So there was a number of things. Chris has done a lot of research on the old ordinance. I'm going to defer to him because he can remember what was done between he and Chris, the two Chris's, between what is.
And before you go, Chris, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the work you do. Yeah,
Go ahead,
shoot,
Chris.
give us the history.
Okay, so 2008, early 2008 was the first adoption of the ordinance. Had a lot of property owners come speak out about it. It was watered down a little bit. Some of the fees were removed. Initially, there was a registration fee for each rental property owner. That was waived. Originally, there was an inspection fee for the first inspection. That was waived. There was a fee for the second inspection, and that was watered down and kept in place. So those were part of the watering down of it. So,
And was that only within the districts, or was that just for
Within the
any
districts.
inspection regardless?
yeah, within the district.
And some of it
Yep.
was that re-inspection process too.
It
That got
yes.
changed where you would go out and then have to go right back out. Some of that was put in delay. So that's, some of that when we get back into the timing and all has some issue as well. And that's one of the things we're going to come back and look back around once they get talking about recommendation. Is that the main things, Chris?
It was, and I don't know if you're going to touch on the administration of it.
I will touch on this, but another respect in which it was sort of watered down is in relation to the right of inspection, and I'll talk about that in a second.
Okay. Well, the other question that I have is, compared to some of our peer localities that we consider ourselves to be on a very similar footing with. How do our rental inspections look compared to theirs? Are we a little looser? Are we a little tighter? Are we a little more strict? Are we a little less stringent? I mean, I know that's a subjective question to ask as well, but are we within the ballpark, the realm of what would be expected of a community, or are there things we can do to be better?
I would say we're on par. Blacksburg's the only other locality that has a rental inspection
Right.
program because they're obviously another university
Right.
city, but I think we're on par as far as enforcement.
Counselor, are there any other questions before we get a little more information from Mike? Because we really have a couple of things to talk about before we go on. First of all, rental inspection, I think how we move forward with that and what we want to do as a council if we feel like we're golden and there's not much more we need to do or how we need to shore it up. And then I'd like to come back to sort of general property, particularly in our commercial districts, and talk about that a little bit on what we can do, what we can't do, what guidelines are out there for us to help go from there. So I want to use the last 20 minutes or so with that. But Mike, will you talk about rental inspection a little bit?
Let me ask this real quick. You said that some of maybe of the fees were watered down. Are they still watered down?
Yeah, nothing's changed.
Okay.
That was the
so-
last time we talked about it, was 2008.
Okay, so when you say there's watered down, I know that you would pose, is there anything else that we need to do or better tools? Would it maybe be that we need to secure these and get these a little bit more stringent? Since even in your own words, right now, they're a bit watered down?
I mean, that would help us. It would help the city. I mean, every time we go out for an inspection, that's.
Well,
people
and we'll
pile
talk about this. I want to let Mike give us his thoughts and everything, but resources are going to be a part of this. And, the fact we're lucky to have Chris and Terry and everybody, but if this is something that's a priority for us, we have to have resources to make that happen.
I'm going to circle back around to that too, because when we first got into this program, we were looking at full-time staffing. They hadn't even gotten into the part of all the administrative involvement in certified letters and notifications and those kind of things that they're trying to handle internally. So all that got pulled out of this when it got moved over, and the only way it was set up to be funded was pretty much through the fire department back at the time, and Rodney will remember how that occurred, but at a smaller department at the time when they weren't doing, and now we're, of course, we've got EMS and all the other things that we do, so it's a little more complicated than it was. Chris does a great job with it, and he has fire inspection anyway, and he's been able to cover that part of it, but if he's on duty and they've got an emergency or a big fire or something, he's got to go take care of that with the department, and this comes in secondary. So anyway, we'll
Mike,
come back
shoot.
to that.
Okay. The thing about going last is everybody steals your fire, which is maybe their job. But, what I'm going to talk to you about, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, I know you all won't have time for questions, so it really was to give sort of a general statement of purpose of a rental inspection program that's been covered to a certain extent. Also to discuss what changes that I would recommend to your ordinance and to your ordinance, and as well as some practical considerations as to what, say, this council can do to maybe make the program better if it does want to keep it in place. As we've discussed, by its nature, a rental property is prone to fall into deterioration compared to other forms of property, just simply by its nature. As I said before, it's usually short-term owners, they're non-owners, and they're usually in more densely populated areas with a lot of people living all in one building. For that reason, the purpose of a rental inspection program is to set up a process by which the city may periodically inspect rental property to ensure that it provides safe, decent, and sanitary living conditions. That, in fact, is the standard that is set out in the state statute that enables localities to adopt rental inspection programs. And you've heard other individuals here that have spoken to you talk about health, safety, and welfare. Well, those are, in essence, the police powers of every locality to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its citizens. This language that the rental inspection program uses to provide safe, decent, and sanitary living conditions, I think is in many respects synonymous, certainly within the umbrella of health, safety, and welfare. I think it's important to keep in mind, and I can tell council is already concerned about this, is that the purpose of a rental inspection program is really to ensure compliance with those provisions of the Uniform Statewide Building Code, specifically the maintenance code, that affect safe, decent, and sanitary living conditions. A rental inspection program really doesn't provide authority to address other things like, peeling paint or faded siding or rust stains from metal fixtures, aesthetic type considerations. Also, and I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's an important point to capture, is that having a rental inspection program in no way prevents you from being able to respond to a complaint that your building department or your fire department receives concerning the condition of a property. Again, I think that the two main benefits of having a rental inspection program is that it does set up a process by which you are periodically checking or inspecting property to make for sure that it is safe, decent, and sanitary, whether you receive a complaint or not. There's certainly the possibility that there's properties out there that aren't safe, decent, and sanitary, but no one has made a complaint. So the point here is that with a rental inspection program, what it allows a locality to do is it allows you to be more proactive rather than reactive. In other words, you're initiating inspections without having to react to a complaint. Secondly, and I think this is another key distinguishing feature of having a rental inspection program compared to just responding on a complaint basis, is that it permits you also, it gives you authority, or your inspection officer the authority to go out and perform the periodic inspections without having to first obtain an administrative search warrant. That is a key attribute of having a rental inspection program. If your inspection official receives a complaint, they can certainly go to the property and attempt to obtain the consent of the owner to do an inspection. But if the owner says no, well, then their only recourse really at that point is to obtain an inspection warrant. That being said, I'm not telling you that because you have a rental inspection program that you won't have an inspection official that goes out to the property and may be denied access. But if they do that, they have violated the ordinance. So there's a repercussion, okay? In terms of changes that I would recommend to your ordinance, as I said earlier, I think that I would start at updating your rental district map. As Chris alluded to, both Chris's, the rental inspection map, I'm not sure when this was last updated. It may be. It's the original, so you're talking about 2008 since. So what you're looking at now are rental inspection district based upon conditions within the city that existed back in 2008. You're talking about 13 years ago. Things may have changed, so I would start there. If there are any outliers that you think are a problem, you may wish to include them on your map, and you can do that if those required findings are made that I read to you earlier.
With that expansion and updating of the map, for a process for that, would we have to have measurable complaints? Or is that enough to be able to say, driving through the city, inspecting, identifying problems? I mean, how do we get that process started to say, we would like to consider this 4 square blocks or this district as a rental inspection district?
I mean, you don't, in my opinion, under the enabling statute, I don't think you, or your ordinance for that matter, I don't think that you necessarily, certainly if you have properties for which you have received complaints and for which you've identified violations of the Uniform Statewide Building Code, of course, those would be good properties to include. But I think really what you're looking for are properties that are at risk of
Right.
deterioration based upon the nature of the property.
Okay.
And you may have properties that are maintained by property managers, and you know that historically they've done a good job, and you may not feel the need to include them in your rental district because they're not at risk of deterioration. I think it depends upon the nature of the property and what you've observed in it. I think the important thing is that in making those findings, you need to be able to back them up with some type of facts about the property that you or city staff have observed.
Okay.
In terms of changes that I would suggest to your ordinance, again, as I said, I think it's a good idea to start with updating your map. And the reason why I include that within revisions to your ordinance is because the map itself, the rental district map, is in fact incorporated by reference into your ordinance. It's part of it. Other changes that I would suggest, to be honest with you, I have reviewed your ordinance. Your ordinance, by and large, tracks the requirements of the state code provision. I don't see a lot that necessarily needs changed, but I would suggest this. You've got a definitions section under subsection B of your ordinance, and there's definitions for building maintenance official and the inspections division. I think these need to be amended to clarify who it is that's actually going to be responsible for administrating the program. As I think Chris Childress, touched on, this this rental inspection program over time has kind of shifted from it being the responsibility of the planning department, the building official's office, to where now it's administered by the fire department. And I think it's important for it to find a home, and I would update your definitions to reflect who's going to be responsible for it.
And it can be updated in a way that, say, we identify a responsible party, but they can have agents or inspectors in other parts of the city, should we need to, like in other areas. Let's say we move the responsibility to the building official, but we could still potentially have someone from the fire department conduct some of the inspections, others if we identify and...
Like they're designated.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, I think you can do it however you want. I just think that right now, the ordinance, at least in, like, for example, your ordinance currently provides in the definitions that the responsibility for the program is the Department of Community Planning, or the person within the Department of Community Planning and Development responsible for enforcement of the Uniform Statewide Building Code. Many times that results in Melissa and Chris pointing at one another. And both of them pointing with the other hand at Chris Gardner. So I think that, again, it's a small change, but I think I'd update your definitions.
Clear identification.
Yeah, and then there's also under subsection D3, there is a reference to properties that are subject to the program having to be registered.
Mm-hmm.
The state code provision states that there shall be no registration requirement or fee. I'm not sure why that is, exactly, or what distinction they're making there, because your ordinance as well as the state code provision both require that property owners who plan to use their property for rental purposes have to notify the city on a form that the city develops. Okay, so if they own property, they decide to start renting it, they've got to notify us. The last thing that I would recommend that the city amend in its ordinance that I do think is really significant, it's under subsection H, and it relates to the right that your inspection official has to conduct inspections. And I spoke to Chris Childress as well as David about this, and I think that at one point in time, your subsection H had more teeth in it, but it was, I think, due to some complaints from maybe property owners in the past, it was watered down. I'm going to read it to you real quick. It's not that lengthy. It basically states under subsection H, for purposes of enforcing provisions of this section, the building maintenance official or his duly authorized agent shall have the right to inspect any dwelling unit within designated areas identified in subsection C, which is your map, of this section at any reasonable time, No inspection shall be conducted without the consent of the tenant, occupant, property owner, or managing agent. If the property owner or managing agent have reserved a right of reentry in order to inspect the premises or pursuant to a duly issued administrative inspection warrant, or as authorized by other lawful means. In the event that the building maintenance official or his duly authorized agent shall be denied access to a dwelling or dwelling unit, he or she may apply for an administrative inspection warrant in order to gain access to the premises. And then it goes on to state that it shall be a violation of this article for any owner, managing agent, tenant, or other person to deny the building maintenance official or his duly authorized agent access to any dwelling or dwelling unit within the areas covered by this section after the building maintenance official has obtained an administrative inspection warrant. In essence, what this is doing is that the enabling legislation basically gave authority to your inspection officials to make the inspection. They have the right to do it, okay, without having to first seek an inspection warrant. What this is doing is that it's basically, in my opinion, sort of undercutting that authority by saying, well, you've got to have the consent of the property owner or an administrative inspection warrant. And it's only a violation of our ordinance if you fail to allow entry after we obtain the administrative inspection warrant, which, by the way, would be contempt, would be
Right.
contempt at that point.
Can I ask real quick, when you have to get an order, what's the process that you have to go through to do that?
Just
Magistrate.
have to go before magistrate and provide enough evidence and see if they're grateful enough to.
Have you been denied orders before? Okay,
Actually, haven't applied for any.
okay.
Yep.
And they may consent, you may not have a problem with it, but I do think that again, as I said earlier, that's one of the distinguishing features of a rental inspection program. You asked about what other
Yep.
localities do. This is what's in the Blacksburg ordinance concerning the right of entry. It states that the building official shall have the right to inspect any rental dwelling unit subject to this ordinance. The owner, managing agent, occupant, or other person in charge of the premises shall permit the inspection. If denied access, the building official shall obtain an administrative search warrant. Okay, so this, provision basically says that if you fail, that your inspection official has the right to do the inspection, and if you fail to permit it, obviously for practical reasons, they may still have to get an inspection warrant, but it's going to constitute a violation of your ordinance for which there's other penalty provisions. So I do think that I do think that would be an important portion of your ordinance to amend as part of this process, but by and large, it does track the state code. Let's talk about practical aspects real quick, because I think that's important stuff to you guys. As has been mentioned earlier, since the adoption of the city's rental inspection program in 2008, the responsibility for the program has really shifted around to at least 3 different departments. I think some decision does need to be made from a practical standpoint as to who's going to be responsible for it. I think it's also important to keep in mind, and this information has come from really talking to all these folks. We sort of had like a team meeting in which we sat down and talked about this before making this presentation to you guys. Since the adoption back in 2008, by and large, the rental inspection program has been operated more on a complaint basis. More so it's been more reactive than proactive. And there's a good reason for that, and it's really practical in the sense that from talking to all these folks, as well as David, it appears to me that you really have a job that's really a full-time job, but it's a job that is being done with half of Chris Gardner's time. So it's you've got basically half of a staff person's time that's being required to perform what in essence is a full-time job. So I think that that in order to administrate this program properly, maybe the way City Council wants to, you need to consider staffing as an issue and dedicating the resources to a full-time position to do that. I also want to tell you that this program under state code is not mandatory. It is something that is discretionary. You don't have to have a rental inspection program. If the city is comfortable responding on a complaint basis, repealing, I'm not suggesting, I'm just giving you your options. Repealing the ordinance is certainly an option as well.
Mike, thank you so much, and I want to give everybody a chance for questions. I think we may end up going just a little bit long because there's two other things I'd like us to touch base on after we finish this. Any questions for Mike real quick? So this has been something that we talked about 3 years ago when we first came to council, some of us, and it's something that's ongoing. First of all, thank you to everybody, fire department, building officials, everybody for all the hard work you do. I know you are doing the very best you can with the resources we've given you. From my perspective, this is something I think we need to explore, but rental makes up a huge component of this city, and being proactive can get us to where we want to be and where we feel most likely as a community we should be. Not looking to create hardships for anybody, but this is one of the biggest businesses in the city of Radford, definitely by dollars, but also by square footage, and managing it properly is really important. So how about this for a timeline? And David, help us, think through this. First and foremost, I think we've got to look at our map and kind of consider what we're looking at as a district, just as Mike said. Resources, to me, would come next, because I think we've got to talk about what resources do we have to have in place, because that will affect the size of the map we can actually manage, and that'll include staffing. And then some of the other things that Mike has recommended we can look at. I mean, some of it feels like we can address pretty quickly once we make a decision what office it's under and how we go from there. But does that sound reasonable to do? I'd like to see us work on this over the next 3 months, and as we head into budget season in November, since we're going to move that up a little bit, that we have some things in place so that we can consider that with the budget calendar. Does that sound reasonable? Sound good?
Yep.
Okay. One other thing that I was hoping we could talk about just for a few minutes are minimum standards for our business districts that might not purely fall under the property maintenance code from a health and safety perspective. And Chris, I don't know if you can help us a little bit on some of this, because I know the General Assembly, I believe 2 years ago, passed additional rules to help communities deal with blight, particularly blighted areas that result in negative consequences for communities. Can you talk just a little bit about that and some of the challenges we face, and then we can have some discussion about some properties in our Main Street Business District?
I can't speak a whole lot on it, but I'll speak what I can. I've done a little research just through the Code of Virginia with their blight ordinances and also with their derelict structure ordinances, and it's going to come back to life, health, safety as far as what we're able to enforce. I mean, anything above and beyond facades and that stuff is going to be an ARB, or it's going to be some other tool other than us. I mean, we're really restricted to the.
So let's talk about that. The current tools we have don't allow us to address things like broken windows that are not an immediate threat to the public or the occupant, if it's taped or something like that. Peeling paint, damaged facades, awnings, signage, things along that line. David, can you talk a little bit about where the city has gone once before with the Architectural Review Board concept? I know it's kind of a big subject, but how we can look at some minimum standards as a possibility for our business district?
There are a couple of ways you can go, and Mike, you, Chris, chime in on this. Over the years, when we became a Virginia Main Street community 30 years ago, the first time around, 25 to 30 years ago, we came in and looked at what options there were available to us. And one of the things that they looked at was a special assessment district and ARB. And you can choose your district, you basically map it out. It's allowed by code. There's a number of things you go through, public hearing. And yeah, all the stuff we talked about tonight, require public hearing, public input.
Right.
Obviously, but we looked at an ARB. David, you were on Main Street. Was it 15 years ago now?
It was 2011, wasn't it? 10, 11?
2008.
Okay,
2008.
so
it's
same
about
time
the
period.
same time. And there were some things that people liked, but for the most part, I think it was going back to that property rights issue, and it kind of, after it got to, I don't know if it got to a public hearing or if it was just public input, fizzled out. So didn't come back up again, and we've just basically been addressing it with, incentives. And that's, and Kim's not here, I'm looking out there, but we looked at POP, and we looked at, ways to put money into the EDA, and EDA give out loans and things like that for painting, facades, awnings, things like that. And that's been successful. We've seen a number of buildings that have changed over, but it has not gotten to the core of some of the things like you're concerned with the broken glass, maybe building getting a little green when the paint's getting tired, mold, awnings gotten tired, things like that. What the front window looks like, there's those kinds of things. And now as we're approaching, in a few weeks, you all will get the East Main Street project that we invested in through CDBG and also through Virginia Main Street program, grant program. So you'll get to see this again, and that may be a good time to talk about this some more, but I'll defer to these guys as to what you can do. But I think Chris mentioned it, ARB, that special assessment area. One of the things, any of these kinds of things that you're looking at, folks tend to get, well, how come I'm paying for that? So you got to look at how you pay for it. It's rental inspection, you're going to have your fees and all associated, so you got some money, revenue to help support the program. Same kind of thing if you look at ARB, whether you do a special assessment district or not, or whether you just look at an overall way to fix up, paint up, clean up kind of thing. And maybe there's some soft standards that we can come forward with that everybody will agree to, that you're not saying, well, you want every other building green and every other building red or something along those lines, or looking at a colonial look. Our Main Street district citywide is very eclectic. It's got everything from colonial to turn of the century to a number of different modern types of stuff. So I'll refer back to you guys.
Before we do that real quick, where I'm coming from, and just to share this with council and anybody who might be joining us, it's looking more to minimum standard rather than some of the ARB issues that had come up previously when we looked at this the last time. Not getting so much more into the conceptual siding and types of displays and colors and all that, but things like peeling and dilapidated paint and facades, damaged or unsightly awnings, broken glass, doors that don't work, things like that on properties that I know all of us have likely been contacted about within the business district of why can't we address X in East End or Y in West End, and trying to figure that out is really what the goal is here. So can you talk a little bit about that for us from a legal standpoint?
I think my comments would be very similar to Chris's in the sense that most of the tools that you have available under the state code, again, are more focused on health and safety issues and giving you the authority to exercise your police powers to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community, to ensure that you have safe structures, not necessarily, structures that have none of the problems that you just described.
I just thought about something. You made,
Regarding the ARB, if you want me to,
do that first.
a lot of times with your ARBs, they're more set up to establish regulations to preserve the historic character of the district. And that doesn't always mean Williamsburg. That means also the historic districts for buildings that were built, say, somewhere, 1910 to 1930, which is, some of the buildings that you see here, you see in a lot of small towns in Southwest Virginia.
I would also
Go ahead.
point out that an ARB still is only triggered when somebody wants to modify that property.
That's exactly correct.
It's important.
Right.
So in an ARB, if you have an existing issue, it is not triggered at that point in time.
No, it's more about if they decide to make improvements, to the property, then the ARB's role is to ensure that those improvements stay true to the, the historic time period represented within the district.
So we
So-
have very, very few sticks to create that bare.
Yeah, I think I think the issue you guys are struggling with, a lot of localities do.
We've got the carrot, we've got the POP program, but I'm growing impatient of just the incentives. Because the people who want to improve are improving and they're utilizing those tools, but what
Yeah.
what do you do?
And I think that's one of the things that we've particularly seen with your investments in the West Main Street district. You're seeing property owners then carry that through. So hopefully that will be your carrot in when you start doing the East Main Street improvements, that as you're replacing sidewalks, replacing street lighting, fixing crosswalks, you're making that public investment. That's our job, is to make those public investments, make the area safe, make the area look good, and then hopefully it will bleed over into the private sector. And I was just thinking, and I can't remember the details, I know there's something about, I know there's some concerns with vacant properties that sit and sit and sit and nothing happens, but I think there is some things associated with vacant properties. I saw somewhere where some places have got some programs, tax programs that
Now,
can
that's
also
where you
help
could put your
encourage-
assessment district and say if a property stays vacant, there's an additional tax or minimum tax or things like that.
I've seen
you
that
can do
somewhere,
if you
several
choose
places
to,
have
right?
got it, and I know that, as you advance your tools for Main Street, maybe things that you're gonna wanna look at, and I think as you start investing in East Main and have the POP and have all the other things, and we've got a meeting with the EDA coming after the, well, they're gonna be involved in both of these presentations, but as you start talking with them to see what they wanna do with investments, and you can cover a lot of ground with the tools that you have, and especially if we're able to, Melissa and I have talked about, that's kind of the next logical phase for our CDBG, because we're talking about residential down in that area. We're talking about alternative transportation, walking, those kinds of things, so that you're able to use some of your money that's allocated towards streets and roads to promote those transportation networks. So I think you've got plenty of things out there that, and with the grants available, that you're going to be able to see some difference. But going back to those individual properties, it does always seem to come back to health, safety, overall concerns, and that's what we've addressed in all the programs you've heard tonight, and generally the outline of what we've got now. So,
In terms of the tools that you guys are utilizing, you've already updated litter, debris, inoperable motor vehicles. I mean, you could maybe take a look at your I'm not sure this is going to get you where you're wanting to go,
Right.
but you could take a look at your nuisance ordinance generally. It probably could use some updating. I think also you may want to consider, looking at delinquent tax sales, delinquent real property. And the reason why I bring that up is that many times, the properties that are delinquent on the payment of real estate taxes are the properties that are being neglected in other respects. Properties that could be nice if perhaps they were with a different owner that got them back on the tax rolls and started using them for some other purpose. So I think that delinquent tax sales is another tool that localities have that may not be being utilized, by the city. And you could certainly look and see what properties that are delinquent on real estate taxes and how those properties are being maintained to see if there is a correlation between the two.
Okay. Any final thoughts for us? Because I know this is a big chunk of something that we need to consider and figure out.
I'm good.
and I think
Go ahead.
one other thing, if council, if this kind of sounds like what you're looking at, if you want to go ahead and let us start carving out some pieces of this, like we did with the ordinance associated with property, with the code enforcement, we can do that. Mike's got some really good ideas of where to go between
We have
all of
consensus, is that
this
what you all
team.
want to consider?
We can bring something back to you, probably within the next month or so. And that way you can kind of see if that's along the lines, and we'll do some additional research to maybe hit some of these other things. And then by then, you will have had your Main Street presentation. You will be able to see kind of where we're going, how to talk with the EDA and see what direction maybe some of this goes. Does that sound okay? You all, and then we'll bring all this back to you.
Sure, and anecdotally, I know that some communities, like we mentioned, historic districts like Williamsburg, it's very restrictive. If there's a broken window or damaged sign or something, they have to meet up to a certain level. Now, I'm sure some of that's in leasing and some of that's in awards that are made and all of that, but there's got to be some set of tools that we could have that at least get us off the floor of some of these things and can allow us to address some very minimum things like that. Onassis, do you have
I'm
something?
just circling back to the rental inspection district. I've looked on Virginia code. I don't see anything that relates to Airbnbs, because they're technically in a residential area, but they do, it's, used for commercial use, air quotes, right? So is there any legislation or ordinance that speak to inspecting of Airbnb locations?
No, it would be complaint-based. As far as the building code side of it, it's still a single-family dwelling.
Okay.
It doesn't change use. It's not suddenly an apartment, just because it's rented out. So under the building code, it's still recognized as a single-family dwelling, so.
And from a registration perspective, I know you stated earlier that homes that are listed as rental properties must be registered as rental properties. Do Airbnb owners have to do the same in terms of registering their properties as Airbnb locations?
I don't think under the rental inspection program, they are registered with the commissioner.
Of revenue, yeah.
Supposedly.
I don't know.
There is no registration, there is no registration requirement for your rental inspection program. In fact, the state code says that you can't have a registration requirement or fee, even though the property owner has to notify you if they're going to be using the property for rental purposes. There is, however, a short-term rental act, which was designed for Airbnb-specific type properties. And it does have a provision by which you can adopt an ordinance that does require that those be registered with the locality so you know they're there, primarily for taxation purposes. So that's.
I think the commissioner attempts to get those. I think it's just a
Well, I think-
matter of,
Well, the process is basically, it's, hit or miss, right? I'm
Right.
assuming. So, yeah, yeah.
okay. Anything else? Hey, thank you to everybody. This is really important stuff, and as David mentioned, this is part of a whole piece. First and foremost, we want to keep everybody safe and in good shape, but as we look to work on East Main Street and continue to enhance our business district and grow some of the things that are going to happen in the next few months, we got to have these pieces in place too. So can we go on and adjourn now and take a 5-minute break and then come back together? Sound good?
Sounds good.
Thank you all. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris, Rodney, Terry.